Hello, everyone, and welcome to SCORE Fairfield County's live webinar, Startups, Failure versus Success, Avoiding the Mines to Stay on the Road to Success. I'm Tim Ryan, the webinar coordinator and a business mentor here at SCORE Fairfield County, and I'll be your host. Our speaker today is Kim Hvidkjaer. More on Kim in just a minute. First, some brief info on SCORE. There's about 300 offices and 11,000 volunteers nationwide. We're part of the Small Business Administration. SCORE Fairfield County has over 100 volunteers with a wide range of industry, process, and subject matter expertise. We offer 3 primary value-added services to small business owners. First, free one-on-one counseling, which can be accessed via the Request Mentor link on our website or via the link on the screen. Second, educational workshops and webinars, over 100 per year. And third, extensive resources on our website, such as Word and Excel templates to help you build your business plan. Some useful information about today's event. If you have a question, please use the chat window at any time during the presentation. It's located in the lower part of your screen. Our webinar will end at 1 p.m. to respect your time. The session is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be available at fairfieldcounty.score.org within the next couple of days. Now, our speaker. Kim Hvidkjaer is an award-winning serial entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and angel investor within several industries. His experience spans entertainment, media, FMCG, hosting, SaaS, utility, and broadband industries. Hvidkjaer aptly was named one of Denmark's 6 rising stars in 2008, based on his early success. I'll now turn it over to Kim. Kim, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here. I'm going to quickly skip forward, and of course, this being a webinar, it's hard to see you guys how you're reacting to what I'm saying. So hopefully, you would just write questions as we move along. I think that's easier. So if there are things that are confusing, or if I'm going too fast or too slow, then just chip in and let me know. So before we begin, I'd like to do a quick test just to verify if you guys are able to click the raise your hand button on Zoom. And perfect. I can see a ton of you already doing that. Sweet. Thank you. Because I'll be asking some questions as we move along, and it would be nice to get an impression of sort of how many have an idea on those things. Okay, and I can see that a few still have the hand up, so just feel free to take that down again. So we'll start out slowly with a very, very small quiz. So this is a number, and anyone has an idea on what this would be, please feel free to write it in the chat. And I'll only give you a few seconds in order not to be too slow about it. And already now I'm going to reveal that this is the percentage of 20-somethings that either already own a company or want to start a company. And failure was a very good take on this. I'll get back to that number in a second. And the point here, of course, being is that all of us founders, and I'm assuming that a lot of you guys have a company or already running a company, we are actually facing some fairly fierce competition coming up, because there are a ton of people wanting to do a startup or already in the process of this. So it's a highly popular thing. And I recently published a book, and in that I had a number saying that 4.4 million new companies were founded every year. But actually right now, because of this, the great resignations, the issues around all of that, of course, last year, 2021, we had almost 5.4 million new businesses in the US alone. So these numbers are definitely on the rise. Next, a few more stats and numbers, and I can already now reveal that you were onto something before. So 90% is the very broad stroke percentage of companies that actually fail. So this, of course, means that the rule is that companies, they fail. This is the most likely scenario for companies, and it doesn't really matter if you founded yet, or if you're bootstrapped, or if you already successfully pitched and received venture funding. The general rule is companies fail. If you are at the point where you've received venture capital, then 67% of companies fail to to either exit or raise follow-on funding. So this is, again, typically, I talk to a lot of founders who believe, okay, now we've got funding in place, everything is going to be great. But that is perhaps a validation of you as a person, or that some other people find your business idea interesting. But please do not mistake that for instant success in any way, shape, or form. And the 97% is a particularly hard category, which is the percentage of hardware startups that either die or become zombies. So hardware, as an example, is a very complicated category to get into. And I've worked with several companies that have a hardware component in it, but it's actually very complicated. Of course, you'll see many successful hardware companies also, but the hardware component specifically is actually fairly complicated to work with. And also, then we'll find a lot of people dreaming of becoming the next startup unicorn, right? And the likelihood of that is less than 0.0001%. So that's best of luck with that. Of course, I hope that for anyone going for that, but it's not likely. And as you probably already know, then hope really isn't much of a strategy. So the very short point here is that startups, they suck. So it sounds nice, and I'm expecting that most of you guys will have experience with this. That it is extremely complicated, and it's a very, very hard job running a company. So the media enjoys portraying this, this image of the entrepreneur as a hero narrative, but the reality is much different. I like to talk about the doing a startup as running a marathon, but through a minefield. So it's hell on earth with things blowing up around you until you most likely step on a mine yourself. So it's a struggle. It's a lot of stress, and often you're on the edge of mental breakdown, basically. And I honestly do not think that I'm exaggerating a tiny bit. And yeah, things get even worse. That there is a rise in the number of suicides, for instance, among CEOs when their companies crash. And this is, of course, an issue with the identity of you as a founder being so related to the company that you are running. So that's the motivational speech. And with that out of the way, let's get started on this. So a few notes on me. My name is Kim, with the terrible Danish last name Hvidkjaer. And I've been working as an entrepreneur for many years now, plus 25 years at least. I'm also working as an angel investor. So I'm getting a lot of pitches from a broad range of categories. I also work as a board member, and my book, How to F Up Your Startup, was recently on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, which is, of course, as a small dream come true. And my story of failure is the following. So back in 2007, I was actually at the point where after having done several companies, I could say, okay, I'm now actually a millionaire. And if I were to, sell off all my assets, I could live off the interest rate for the rest of my life. So this was, of course, a superb situation, and everything was good. I was named, as Tim kindly introduced, one of the 6 rising stars in Denmark. And as you can already tell by bullet point number 3, fast forward 2 years later, I was broke. So over those 2 years, I had lost more money than the average American will earn in a lifetime. And financially, this was, of course, rock bottom, but also forced me to look at, why did this happen? What went wrong? And this actually started my interest in in this slightly morbid category of failure. So during that period, I started sort of analyzing my own failures, and also became more and more aware of other companies that had failed and why they had done so. And this has then led to now 14 years of structured analysis within the category of failure. And I've interviewed numerous founders, and I actually have data from 160,000 failed companies. And as a small side note here is also that if any of you guys have experience in this category or know about anything like that, I'm actively collecting data on this, so it would be a dream to hear from you and get more perspective on this. So what I've done with the book is that I've boiled this down to 62 different FUPs that as I've named them, just to get a little bit of attention, and of course their associated fixes. And okay, so first off, of course, what is an FUP? So before we dive in, let's just agree on what this actually is and what it isn't. And of course, failing with a company or doing something like that isn't, selecting the wrong paper type for your business, and it's not, going too expensive in terms of the computers that you buy for your new office. It's so it's not smaller type decisions, and of course, it's not in the category either where you are, being hit by lightning on your way home from work because you couldn't really see that coming. So it is, however, failing in making, for instance, a solid business model for your business before investing a ton of money in it. So I've done a definition of this, as there weren't any really, and this is so an FUP is the neglect of action resulting in a significant and preventable mistake. So this means that it's something that you've neglected doing, and that would then have a significant, of course, negative impact. And it's something that could have been prevented had you handled the situation differently. So for most startups, this would often be, multiple FUPs in a combination that would lead to their downfall. And the mission here, of course, is to give you guys some idea of what some of these can be and some of the categories. In my book, I'm walking through sort of the life cycle of a startup, starting from the attitude that we as founders would have towards ourselves and our business, through business models, through the funding of the company, growth, and so on. And I'm going to take some of my favorite ones and go through today. Before we get to that, it's worth talking about why FUPs are actually important. So why would this matter? And what you see here is my sketch of and obviously I'm not an illustrator, even though I spent time on trying to make this look like an airplane. So this is a sketch of a combat airplane that was used by the US Air Force during World War II. And the dots represent data collected on the planes returning from combat. And now, of course, the question being, can you guys get what the dots are? And the chat is open. So any takes on sort of what are all these dots that are shown? Yes, and Matthew is quick, and bullet holes, and William the same. Of course, you guys are right. So these are bullet holes, what we have here is what we had then was a Hungarian mathematician called Abraham Wald, and he was tasked with studying the location of all these bullet holes in order to determine how to better strengthen these planes with armor. And of course, the issue here being that they couldn't just put more armor all over the place, because they had there were weight issues. They still had to carry the personnel, the fuel, the bombs, and whatever. So based on the image that you're seeing here and the bullet holes, where would you then recommend the designers to add more reinforcement? And again, remember this part about the weight. So we can't just throw more metal all over the place, as they would still have to cover the same distance and so on. So maybe you're considering the wings or other sort of the central part where we have cockpit safety pilots. Great. So actually, Jonathan is on something here, because the point here is that what they initially started doing was to think about, okay, how do we cover all these bullet holes? But actually, what you will see then in for instance, the cockpit isn't on this drawing. And the point here is that what also our good friend Walt realized is that once you step back, that the planes he wasn't examining was all the planes that didn't come back. And the fact is that all of the planes that came back with these bullet holes, they were shot in the places where they weren't the most vulnerable. So what he should instead be looking at would of course be sort of where are all the planes that didn't come back. And this is a classic example of what is now known as survivorship bias, which, as the name indicates, means that we tend to look at the survivors, right? So we are giving much attention to all of the, in this example, airplanes, and there are a lot of more examples on this, but in our category, a lot of examples to all the winners out there. So we all, I've read, of course, the Steve Jobs biography and all of those, the virgins of this world, and all of those companies that have done extremely well, right? Tesla, Musk, and all of these people. So we tend to focus on the success stories out there. And I would definitely argue that that's relevant and interesting. But what is actually more important is to look at why is it that companies fail. And when I talk about this marathon in a minefield, the concept is that if you are able to map out where the key issues are located in terms of running a company, you're in a much better position than if you are basing your company on other success stories. Because why was Steve Jobs successful, for instance? Well, there were a ton of elements there. Not just that he was Steve Jobs or that he had this idea or strong vision and all of those other things, but there was timing involved and a lot of things that you can't emulate. So what is a much stronger take on this is to make sure that you are avoiding all of the mines that are out there. And that will then lead to, if you're just with your company, if you're just staying alive for a significant period of time, you will actually be in a situation where you will be successful. And also looking at this, these ton of companies, the data involved here, you can see, the drop-up rate initially is much higher. So once you have a few years behind you, the likelihood of you succeeding as a founder just goes up. So the task here is, which I'll get back to also as I've defined as rule 0, is just don't die, avoid the mines, and sort of that should be sort of your priority. By all means, also study all of the successes out there, because that's A, interesting, and B, of course, will also give you inspiration. But it's very important to be aware of where is it that the mines are located and what are the key issues that you are most likely to run into. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the actual F-ups. And the first category that I've taken here is also the first in my book, which is also a personal favorite, is in terms of your attitude. And this is you as a founder and how you look at things and how you are acting. And one of my personal issues, and one of the reasons why I fell flat on my nose back in the days, was this one called plate spinning. And you can, and a quick note to Madeline is that yes, this is being recorded, so you can catch the start at a later point also. So imagine, the circus act, where a performer sets multiple plates spinning on their hands, shoulders, head, knees, and all that. You've all seen that, and it may be entertaining and fun to look at, but in practice, it's a hard thing to do. So let me take you back to a story from 2009, which was at the point where digital media was still relatively young, and much on the rise, and it had also been throwing this whole world of journalism into chaos, basically, because the distribution and billing models behind news content were sort of increasingly shifting from print to online media. And this has been extremely stressing for all of the established media companies. I've had my only real job has been as a chief commercial officer in the largest Danish media company, and that was much later. But trust me, that this is high on the agenda in all media companies. So back in 2009, we had the situation where digital is interfering with the classical print business model, and not only did the media companies stress about this, but also journalists worldwide sought new ways to interact with their readers, and also, of course, just make a living of their work. And here we meet Paul Becker and Nathan Chung, who were two computer scientists. And I've interviewed Paul, who is definitely a bright guy. Unfortunately, probably much smarter than I am. And back in October 2009, they founded their startup, which they called Newstilt. And they were aiming, which I think at the time made complete sense, they were aiming to help journalists become small entrepreneurs themselves, who would then sell their work online. So they were taking this huge disruption coming up in a category of media and saying, okay, how can we spin this in a way where we can make a business model and actually help out journalists, which I think that was a good take on the situation. And this duo figured out that if they could figure a way to capitalize on reporting the news by offering a platform for independent journalists, then they would actually have a platform that would have a staying power online. The business model was that Newstilt would keep 20% of ad revenue, and the rest would go to the writers. So this is not unlike what we're seeing today in terms of Apple's App Store for games and so on. And it would be an attractive structure for journalists. Also seeing how, if you look at the media companies today, what they're getting in terms of salary versus the ad revenue on platform is a completely different number. So this was business-wise interesting, and their revenue model included hosting and selling ads on branded niche sites and so on. And the market potential was quite sizable due to the pressure on traditional media. And again, they had millions of journalists feeling the pressure also on their jobs and so on, who would most likely be interested in this. And Paul Becker and Chung, they actually got a funding from the famed Y Combinator, and actually they are the same company that have invested in Airbnb, Stripe, Drugs, and so on, because they had a strong pitch and a strong market situation. We then saw a year later that TechCrunch, which is the leading tech industry journal, announced that the launch of Newstilt as a compelling and predicted a promising future for this company. And as you can already guess, of course, that's not how it turned out. 2 months later, Newstilt closed doors for good. So what went wrong? One of the issues, as Paul described, is that he was actually, he was getting married, he was completing a PhD, and doing a ton of things at the same time as he was doing this company. So on top of this, they didn't even really care for the category of journalism. So they had a great business idea, but they weren't doing this, wholeheartedly, full time. Can't think of anything else 24/7. He had a ton of things on his plate. And this combined with another fact is that they weren't journalists. They didn't feel anything, they didn't really even read the news themselves, right? So a combination of this saying, okay, too many things on your plate, and also in their case specifically that they didn't really have this strong vetted interest in the category was their downfall. This is something that I've done personally also, so I really I sympathize with their case and I feel their pain, and probably a lot of you guys would have done the same thing. So this is one of the key issues that many companies fail, is of course just doing too many things at the same time. And the fix for this sounds easy, and it can be complicated, but the idea is of course accomplish more by doing less. As an example, I have way too many business ideas going on, and what I'm doing is that I'm actively maintaining a not to do list. So having a list of things that you are, I'm agreeing with myself, these things I'm not doing, has actually turned out to be quite helpful. So instead of saying, okay, I have these 50 things, I would actually write them all down, and then I would take, prioritize those and take maybe the 5 on top and say those actually get to live on the to-do list, and rest probably goes on the not to-do list, or when I have time, which is most likely never. So point here being, of course, that we all need to prioritize our time, and if we are not able to allocate significant time and focus to this, then we are not going anywhere, and we need to reconfigure that situation somehow. So I'm thinking that one is pretty clear, but again, please feel free to throw in questions as we move along. Okay, moving quickly on to another category would be business model F-ups, and there are a lot of those. I have 6 or 7 in my book. I'm going to take my favorite one, which is also, I think, one of those that are very important, and that is what I like to call for the problemless solution. And in this digital age, and all too common example of this is when a startup tries to digitize something that is better done by hand, sort of the old-fashioned way. And the issue here, of course, is that you really need to identify a problem in the market, and if there isn't one, then you have an issue. And this is one of my favorite cases on this. I'm a avid tea drinker, as you can tell, and this is a beautiful design where we have a company called Teaphoria, and they tried to disrupt this age-old tradition of boiling a kettle for tea. So they produced a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled tea infuser with a price tag of $1,000. And while this does look like something that would have come from Apple, it has a hefty price tag, and the tea brewed in this machine didn't exceed the way that you guys are most likely doing tea right now, or that I just did just before this webinar, right? So there's no improvement in terms of quality. Plus, this sort of specialty drinkware for the device needed to be hand washed and maintained in a lot of different ways. So nothing about this venture did actually fix an existing problem. So while it on the surface it sounds nice with in all of our Internet of Things having Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all of those things, not actually solving a problem is a problem. It's a huge problem. And this is, of course, on a corporate level as a company, but also when you're launching new products. So for me, this product actually, caused more problems than the classic way of doing it. And add up top of this, who would want to pay $1,000 for a tea infuser, right? When it turned out that tea drinkers prefer to boil waters for their cups of tea, well, the product of course bombed. And okay, so did the founders learn from this experience? No. Rather than considering that this product was totally unnecessary for anyone, they actually in a corporate company statement said that success would have required a lot more money and time to educate the market. And they simply couldn't raise the funds required in what was a very hard time for hardware startups. So the phrase alone that they would require a lot of money to educate the market. It's like all of the alarm bells going off at the same time, right? So one thing here is definitely that if you ever feel the need to educate your customers in terms of how good this product is and so on and so forth, of course, maybe they're not aware of the product existing. That's fine. By all means, throw money at advertising. But if you need to educate your customers that this is a problem, then you have the problem and you are most likely not going to succeed. So there's an equation here saying, of course, if you need to change, if your customers need to change their behavior, then that's going to be a huge issue. And as you might have guessed, the fix for this is to focus on problems. So what a lot of founders tend to focus on is saying, okay, I've got this great idea for this or that. If that idea isn't born out of problems, then you should be very careful about that. There's the famous Einstein quote saying that when he was looking at a problem, he would spend for 1 hour, he would spend 55 minutes focusing on the problem and 5 minutes focusing on the solution. So, how can we fix this? I try to work with like a 5-step process for this. So first off, write down the problem. Not a solution, but write down the problem. And this is in the case where you can sort of visualize the T4 case. What would they have been writing on their paper? I imagine a very blank paper. So write down the problem, right? And then next step is to determine, is this a sort of a tier 1 problem? Is this painful enough for the target audience to actually care about this? So I also talk about, is this a headache pill or a vitamin pill? If this is a vitamin pill, maybe people won't be going and driving anywhere to do this. Or whereas if it's a headache pill, okay, I actually feel the pain, I'm going to go find me some headache pills. So think about sort of, is this problem important enough for people to care? And next, the third step is to okay, then correctly determine the current existing solutions and look for pain points. So you need to look at what is already in the market. Fourth would be, of course, to verify if you're able to allocate a budget for this, and fifth would be to actually use your customers and prospects to define your roadmap. So once you've seen, okay, there is a problem, I have that, and it's a big problem that is relevant for the target group. It isn't already solved by someone else, and I can somehow finance this. Then use your potential customers to move ahead. Does this make sense? I know we're on Zoom, but still feel free to shout if there are questions about this. And Leroy had a question about incorporating partners, which I'm thinking would be about plate spinning, as previously, which is definitely a way, of course, to solve problems. Would be to get more resources to solve your issues. That could be okay. Moving on to the next one. Expand on, a question here on using your customers to find a roadmap. Yeah, sure. So there is I have a whole section on funding, which we're not getting a lot into now with the interest of time, but let me just still add a comment to this, being that I firmly believe that companies need to bootstrap initially. This means that you shouldn't, unless it's in rare cases, yes, but in the vast majority of cases, you should bootstrap your company. You should somehow find the funding for your company yourself. And the perfect way of doing this is, of course, to find customers that would actually pay for what it is that you're doing. So this is going to be much more helpful than getting validated by idiots such as me who would be interested in investing in your company. If you have an idea, please send it over and I'll be happy to look at it. But you're actually better off doing things yourself initially. And finding a potential customer is the best, by all means, the best way to both fund your company and to help you define your roadmap. Because if you have a customer that has, I would like a tea boiler that would do this or that, then maybe you're onto something. Then maybe you have a problem that you can actually build a company around. But if your prospects are not seeing the problem, then you have the problem, and you really need to work with this in a different way. So always focus on problems. Don't be sort of the happy-go-lucky character that will say, "Oh, I have this burning vision. I'm going to go create this," unless you've started with a problem. Period. End of discussion. I won't hear of anything else. You need problems, and that's the only way to make a company. Okay. So another question being, is this recorded? Yes, you'll get the link, and you can see it afterwards. Okay. Next up, we'll move on to market research. And this is what I like to call for the messed up MVP. So another way to increase the risk of failure is either to do your MVP wrong or downright skip it altogether. And an MVP is the minimum viable product. For those of you who haven't met the term before, it was originally coined by a guy called Frank Robinson, but popularized by Eric Ries and others later in the books on startups. And the idea is that this is a product with just enough features that is usable, which is then sold and tested to its customer base to get feedback. So this is related to what we just talked about. And the idea being that if your business idea is good enough, then this is kind of a sellable prototype. And this will do several things for you. It will, test the market, verify if the market requirement is there, and also it will, you will start selling a product. So minimum viable product. So if you mess this up, then you are on a road of failure. And this is, I have many, there are a ton of examples of this, but one of my personal favorite would be this beautiful product, a Google Glass. I don't know how many of you remember that, but this is, a problemless solution. But they would have known this if they had actually done an MVP, which they forgot. Google, you should have known better, right? But but they've done a ton of this actually, and Google actually has a history of doing a ton of not very good products, as they have this tendency to do moonshots and hope for the best. Of course, what should be known and respected in this is, of course, that they are then actively trying to innovate. They are making a ton of good progress, and I'm a huge Google fan, and all of my companies are running on Google infrastructure because they do such a great job. But Google Glass was announced with a fancy video and a full-fledged prototype, and everything was looking nice. And these spectacles were supposed to be the latest and greatest way to send and receive messages, and this was nice hardware and all of those things. And as we've already covered, hardware is complicated, right? I can, in the interest of time, long story short, this tanked completely. When they released this, techno hipster glasses, they had a ton of problems around privacy issues, and everything went wrong. Had they created and tested an MVP instead of rolling out this full-fledged hardware solution, they would have known, and maybe they would have been able to reconfigure the product, or at the very least, they would have saved a lot of money and time and credibility, to be honest. So the fix for this is to do the MVP. And I've done, again, another very fancy sketch illustrating that I'm not an illustrator. So the incorrect way of doing this would be to, wait until you have a full-fledged product and then launch it. So in the car example, you develop the wheel, the base of it, and finally you'll get to the car point. Instead, look at what is the product features or the value proposition that you're going out with, and then say, okay, this is transportation, maybe. Fine. Start off with skateboard, move on to bicycle, motorcycle, and the car. Of course, this wouldn't be the actual product development, but for instance, in one of my companies called Simply CRM, where we are obviously a CRM platform, we started out by developing a CRM that was a minimum viable product. So this was CRM enough for it to be usable. But at that point in time, we didn't have to integrate with all of the ERP systems of the world so that people could do all of the invoicing from within simply CRM. Instead, we did like the basics first, and then, oh, okay, people like this, and little by little we added more functionality, and today can do all of this ERP stuff. But we didn't do that to begin with, because otherwise we would have, it would have taken us many more years before we actually had a product and would be able to know if there was an interest for this at all. Okay, so time is flying when we're having fun, and with the respect to for all of your time, I'm just going to continue. But again, please feel free to shoot questions. So another favorite we'll get to is this, which I just like the title, and it's not even something that I've invented, with it called death by overfunding. And this is one of the issues that you can meet within the category of funding FOps. And another small drawing here being, this is what founders that I talk to are generally happy about. And this is, to the right, you'll see how, excited they are when they have an investor offering them to invest in the company. And in the left category, we see how happy they are when they actually win a customer over proving the business case. And as you will know by now, as from our conversation so far, I would like this to be opposite. You should be completely up there whenever you have customers verifying your product versus, an investor. Maybe that'll be great for your company, maybe it won't, but the customers are, of course, the important part in this situation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there is one of the good examples here being Jawbone, which you may or may not remember. Which this was a hardware startup. I know that I have a lot of hardware examples in this. That's actually a coincidence. In my book, I have cupcake companies and coffee shops and other things, but in this case, it's a hardware startup, and they did products in a very interesting category, I think, which is similar to Fitbit, for instance, which was actually bought by Google, but they received a ton of funding. And what happened was actually that they were overfunded. So suddenly, the management had to figure out, oh, okay, now we have this Series A round and we've got a ton of money. What are we going to do? And they started doing things that weren't really profitable, but, should work for them in the long run, as opposed to, looking at your business by quarters and seeing, what is actually going to be profitable in the short term. So suddenly they changed the whole perspective on the company as to not looking at this as founders, as maybe you guys would be doing, or I would be doing, because maybe we're a smaller scale in this. But okay, how can we use all of this money to justify the investment, right? Had they left, they actually, had they left the money in the bank, they would be fine. But they started, ramping up in a ton of different areas at the same time, which wasn't really helpful for them. So of course, actually the fix for this I covered already, saying, bootstrap for as long as you possibly can. And when you have proved your business case, that is a good time to go out and look for funding. So then you would be using funding to scale up your business. But if you're trying to get funding to save your business, that is going to be an issue, and it's going to be too expensive. You're going to, pay a too high a price in terms of equity and whatnot to get there. Okay, I'm going to take the last one here so we can get to the question part, and this is missing sales metrics. So now we are in sales FOps, and sales metrics are so important. They are the health check of startups. So not measuring what is important means that it can't be improved, and you all know the classic, what gets measured gets done. So looking at your KPIs is an essential part, and it's crucial that you measure your conversions in your sales funnel. So this doesn't matter what type of business or what category you're working in, you need to measure all of these data points. So, what is your conversion rate if you're doing cold call, for instance? So if you have in-person meetings with potential customers, are you using direct mail campaigns or emails? How many people are visiting your store or unique users on your website? How long are they there? What is the average session length? All of these things you need to collect, and measuring all of it, not just 1 or 2 areas, is where you really need to make sure that you are heading this home. Where I have an example, I have a lot of examples. One example here being a company called Mobile Igniter, and that was obviously a tech hardware startup. Sorry about that again, hardware startups that closed doors back in 2016. And one of their primary mistakes was to set their target sales goal, very far into the future. And along the way, they didn't track their progress towards achieving those, far-flung goals. And this is a problem I've seen many times when I'm receiving a pitch deck for companies that are looking for funding. I've even done it myself a few times. But let's not go there. That is, setting your goals very far down the road and not being able to measure that. So if they had tracked their progress over 3, 6, 12 months sales cycles, then they would have had a much better chance of actually matching their production to the actual market demand. And if things weren't working out, then they would also have been able to know so in advance. And the fix for this one is kind of simple. It is track your data, visualize your funnel, make sure that you have a funnel. So if you guys are not saying, if you're thinking a funnel, what is that? Then by all means, Google it or send me an email and I'll send you a 1-page on that. And also seriously, you need to get a CRM. I'm completely colored by this as I run a CRM company, but in all honesty, any CRM will do. You don't have to select ours. Select any CRM. Just make sure that you're using one. That is essential for any business. It's like a big proactive database of customer data, and it will remind you of everything in terms to serve your customers and grow your business effectively. And it will be a place where you can collect your data, so you can say, okay, how many people? What does our pipeline look like? What am I most likely going to have in revenue for the next month, the next year? Which is the only way that you can predict, do I need to hire more people? Do I need to let someone go? Do I need to, relocate, scale up on production? Is this shop not working, or is that store working? So on and so forth. So you need this data. You need to look at your business as a funnel, right? A funnel being in the top, you're putting in your prospects, potential customers. You'll move them through the funnel with a conversion rate. So maybe you have someone, visiting your website if you have a website, and then they will sign up to your newsletter or try out your service. And next step being that they will maybe have a free trial of your product, and ultimately they'll become a customer, or whatever your sales process may look like. But you really need to make sure that you have a funnel and that you're tracking your conversion rate for each step of funnel. If this is a physical store, fine. I've been involved with a tea company, for instance, where we sold tea. I would sit down and you can get automated counters for how many people are visiting your store. I would sit down with a sandwich across the street from the competitor for a few days and physically count how many people visited their store to have an idea of how are they doing. And then I could get any reports and compare those things to have a comparison. And this is just so immensely important. Okay, so we're almost out of time. I'm just going to throw in a last rule here, which is the one called Rule 0 of startups, which basically just says, don't die. And the idea is that if you are able to, avoid the mines throughout all of this, then you are, at the end, you will find success, right? But you just need to make sure that you move through the marathon of doing this company that you are already most likely involved with by not stepping on any of those mines. And if you're able to do that, That's perfect, and that's the situation we want to be in. And the last thing is that if you have any new FOps that I haven't, of course, you haven't seen all of the stuff that I've collected here, but if you have examples and cases or anything like that, then please send them over. I am actively collecting this, and most likely I'll be doing a book more on it later on. And also there will be a database that will go live and so on. So if you have examples of this, of failure, and equally well of how you fixed it, I'm all ears on that. So in that case, feel free to connect with me. You can find my contact information on my website, and also you're more than welcome to catch me on any sort of social media. So that was what I had for today.
That's great, Tim. Kim,
yeah, super.
Yeah,
yes,
Kim, that was wonderful. We'll use the rest of our time for a little Q&A.
Yep.
We'll take as many questions as we can before 1 o'clock. So please submit them via the chat feature at the lower part of the screen. Kim, one of the things that you mentioned in the beginning was the Great Resignations impact, and how 2021 has been such a banner year in new startup companies, which seems to be against expectations, really, with the COVID closing and so forth.
Yeah.
And a lot of business shutting down. It was amazing that so many new start. Do you have any factors? If you analyze any of the factors to see why Great Resignation actually happened, I guess?
There are, in all honesty, the way that COVID has been developing has surprised me a lot, in all honesty. So also sort of the financial aspect of this, because of course I'm currently in Denmark, which is a very small country compared to the US, but in terms of the startup environment, it's very comparable. And so we've seen the same thing here. And I've done some interviews with new founders on this, and actually this has been, they've actually had time to think about what is it they want. They've been dissatisfied with their job, and okay, off to do a startup. And actually, I think that a lot more people than are currently founders should be founders. It's a great thing for many people to do. That being said, there are of course also people who aren't cut out for this, and won't sort of find the safety that they need and the sort of the security in their life being a founder, because it is this roller coaster. And it is so important that people realize the amount of companies that just fail. And so this statistic, because what we all hear about all the time is, 20-year-old something runs off and makes a gazillion by selling something to something, right? And it's probably true, but it's not going to happen for you guys. It's not going to happen for me. It's not realistic, right? So we need this realism in there. And Marion has a quick question of where I'm based, and I'm currently in Denmark, in Copenhagen, the capital here, but tend to be all over the place, and also often in the US. But I'm a Dane, which explains the weird name and my weird accent. Yeah.
Great. You mentioned CRM. I think that's customer relations managing systems.
Yeah.
I believe like Constant Contact, is that one that would fall into that realm then?
Constant Contact is more of an emailing platform, I would argue, but there are a lot of examples of this. So CRM is as you said, a customer relationship management system, and the idea being that even if you're a one-man shop or woman, you need to have somewhere where you store all of your customer information. I had a board meeting earlier today with a company that I've co-founded, where they actually the people working there, there are only 3 people there, sort of in the daily business, and they've moved from doing Excel sheets onto a CRM, and a CRM needs to fulfill some criteria, and that is, for instance, you need to be able to store your contacts. You need to be able to store, and for an example, Karina, to answer your question, no, MailChimp isn't a CRM. Constant Contact isn't a CRM either. Those are emailing platforms. And they are great. I, for instance, I love MailChimp and I use it myself, but you need somewhere where you can store your customer information and also the different sales opportunities that you have. So if you are, in most industries, you also need to save the sales opportunities, saying, okay, you can maybe in that situation see, okay, I have 100 opportunities going on right now. I know that my closure rate is on average 20%, for instance, and I can have an estimated value on each of those opportunities, and that would mean that I have an idea of how is my month looking or my quarter looking or something like that. And another question from Green is being in terms of Shopify. So Shopify is, of course, an e-commerce platform, as anyone using it would know. But also for Shopify, I would connect an actual CRM. And of course, I'm highly biased, so feel free to Google whatever you need yourself. But Simply CRM, where I'm also working on a daily basis, has all of that, and we use it ourselves. And the reason why I actually did a CRM was because I felt the need for this. So if anyone is interested in that, then drop by Simply CRM and send us an email, and I or a colleague would be happy to take a free discussion on what you need, and then you would be welcome to skip over to the competition and find what you need instead, if that should be better. But please, make sure that you have a CRM.
Right, yes. So the plate spinning you mentioned seems to be an element we constantly see at SCORE. Someone likes making pizzas or whatever. They don't like managing customers or customer development or advertising or doing social media content. That can be outsourced, I guess, using AI systems that are now available and things like that. But that's you must be seeing that a lot in your CRM systems then. Yeah.
So actually, just to comment on that, AI is it's fancy and it sounds good, and we also have AI components in our platform. But honestly, people aren't using AI. It's the same thing as we know with big data. When people talk, big data can do everything. Unless you are Facebook or Google, it doesn't matter. So I'm assuming that the crowd here, and for the business that I'm involved with, it's not that much. It's not a big deal yet. It will be. So right now, we are sort of overestimating the value and impact of AI, but in the long run, we're actually underestimating the value and impact of AI. So today, doesn't matter what you are doing manually, is going to be much more efficient. But give it a few years, and then it's going to be a different discussion. But as of right now, there are many other ways of doing it. But definitely, outsourcing, social media management, or getting someone to write your direct mails or whatever, by all means, go ahead and do that, because you can find someone who is skilled at that, and that isn't your thing. And you like making the food in the cafe or whatever better, then please do that. Right.
Yeah. Michelle was asking if you've ever heard of bottle.com. Have you ever heard of bottle.com?
I actually don't know bottle.com, in all honesty. Probably. So if it's for order tracking and so on, then I'll have a colleague who'll know more about that, who will be more geekish than I am on that. So Michelle, feel free to shoot an email, and I can get someone to look at that. But yeah, either way, make sure that also our plate spinning examples with our good friend Paul, who, by the way, today has great success with other things that he's doing. Right. So this news till situation is back then, and he learned a lot from that, and he's a super bright guy. But what happened at that point was, of course, also not only did they spin plates, but they didn't really care about this. So if you're doing a pizza shop and you don't like pizza, right? It's not going to work. If you're a gaming company, as I also feature as such as Sinja, where they are a big company and stuff like that, in their board, we found that none of the board members actually liked gaming. So if you have a gaming company and you're not into gaming, then it's not going to work, because you need to live and breathe for the business that you're in. You need to know about it, and also want to learn about it in your spare time.
Thank you.
Otherwise, you're screwed.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, super.
Our next SCORE webinar is tomorrow, April 20th, SEO keywords, understanding the user's search intent, presented by Nalini Guzern. Again, SCORE offers free individual mentoring, so please use the link on the screen or visit our website and click request a mentor. Also, please fill out your evaluations that will be sent at the end of the webinar. On behalf of SCORE, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's live webinar. In closing today, a big thank you to Kim for presenting today. Have a nice rest of your day, everybody.